We're implementing budget cuts, and your position has been eliminated, Trent said with a dismissive shrug, leaning back in his leather chair. Thanks for everything, Granny. I sat across from him in his spacious corner office, stunned into silence, the certificate of completion for Jenna's training program still warm in my hands. I had just finished presenting it to him, proud that I'd successfully trained the young intern over the past 4 months. And this was my reward: immediate termination. Today is your last day, he continued, when I didn't respond. Human Resources has prepared your final paycheck and severance, 2 weeks' pay. My name is Becky Smith. I'm 61 years old, and after 7 years as the project coordinator at Everline Urban Design in Omaha, Nebraska, I'd just been fired. 7 years of ensuring every permit was filed correctly, every deadline was met, and every regulatory hurdle was cleared, all ended in a 3-minute conversation on a Friday morning. Budget cuts? I finally managed, my voice steadier than I felt. The same week we secured the $35 million Riverside development project, Trent had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, adjusting his expensive tie. It's a strategic restructuring. Jenna will be taking over your responsibilities now that you've completed her training. Jenna Blake, the 24-year-old intern I'd been training since March, the one I'd patiently taught everything about the complex web of city regulations, contractor relationships, and permit applications. The one who had no actual experience in urban development, but boasted thousands of followers on social media. I see, I said, gathering my dignity around me like armor. Will there be a transition period? The Riverside project has several critical permits pending. That won't be necessary, Trent replied, already checking his phone. You've done a thorough job training Jenna. She's up to speed on everything. I doubted that very much. 4 months of training couldn't replace 7 years of experience, let alone the 3 decades I'd spent in this industry before joining Everline. But arguing would accomplish nothing. Human Resources will help you clear out your desk, Trent added, standing to signal our meeting was over. We've arranged for security to escort you out by noon. Security escort? As if I might what? Steal office supplies? Sabotage files? After 7 years of loyal service, this final indignity burned worse than the firing itself. Thank you for the opportunity, I said, rising from my chair with all the poise I could muster. It took every ounce of self-control not to tell him exactly what I thought of him and his strategic restructuring. As I walked out of his office, I saw Jenna waiting by the reception desk, excitement poorly concealed behind a mask of professional concern. She'd known this was coming. Perhaps she'd even orchestrated it. And in that moment, as the reality of my situation sank in, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't scream. I would simply leave. What they didn't know was how ugly this would get for them. 2 hours later, I placed the small box containing my personal belongings in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat, finally allowing myself a moment to process what had happened. 7 years of dedication ended with budget cuts, Granny, and a security escort. I hadn't always worked at Everline. For most of my career, I'd been at larger firms in Omaha's development sector. But 7 years ago, when the housing market crashed and layoffs swept through the industry, Trent had recruited me specifically for my regulatory expertise. We need someone who knows how to navigate the system, he'd said then. Someone with established relationships at the city planning office. Those relationships had been crucial to Everline's growth from a struggling 5-person studio to one of Omaha's most promising architecture firms. The Riverside development was their biggest project yet, a $35 million mixed-use complex that would transform the downtown riverfront. I'd spent months securing the preliminary approvals, calling in favors from contacts I'd cultivated over decades. I hadn't minded when Trent asked me to train Jenna. New blood was important in any company, and I enjoyed mentoring younger staff. For 4 months, I'd patiently explained every form, every deadline, every unwritten rule that made the difference between a stalled project and a successful one. The trick with the zoning office is to submit on Tuesdays, I told her. Harold reviews applications on Wednesdays, and he's much more lenient than the Thursday staff. Jenna had nodded, taking careful notes, asking thoughtful questions. I'd been impressed by her attention to detail, her apparent eagerness to learn. I'd even defended her when other staff complained about her constant social media posting. She's young, I'd said, but she's working hard and learning fast. What I hadn't seen were the private meetings with Trent, the lunches they shared, the way she positioned herself as the innovative future while subtly painting me as the outdated past. I started my car but didn't immediately drive away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called my daughter, Catherine. "Mom, aren't you at work?" she answered, surprised to hear from me mid-morning. "Not anymore," I replied, my voice finally cracking. "I was fired today." "What? Why?" Catherine's shock and indignation were immediate. I explained what had happened, the sudden termination, the insulting severance, being replaced by the very intern I'd trained. "That's age discrimination. You can sue them," Catherine exclaimed. "Maybe," I said, signaling to exit the parking garage. "But I'm not sure a lawsuit is my first choice." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked, suspicious. She knew me too well. "Nothing," I replied innocently. "I just need to think." What I needed to think about was how best to remind Everline of exactly what they'd thrown away. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, still processing the abrupt end to my career at Everline. The shock had faded, replaced by a simmering anger that I rarely allowed myself to feel. I wasn't just angry about losing my job. I was furious about how it had happened. The disrespect, the callousness, being discarded like obsolete equipment after years of dedicated service. I opened a folder I'd maintained meticulously for years, digital copies of every permit, every application, every approval I'd secured for Everline's projects. I paid particular attention to the Riverside development files. What Trent and Jenna didn't understand, what they hadn't bothered to learn, was that these weren't just standard forms submitted through normal channels. 3 years ago, the city of Omaha had approached me directly to help streamline their permit process for major developments. The city planning office was perpetually understaffed and overwhelmed by complex projects. Harold, the senior planning officer, had known me for decades and trusted my thoroughness and integrity. Together, we developed a solution. I established Smith Regulatory Consulting, LLC, which would serve as an official liaison between developers and the city. The arrangement benefited everyone. The city got a reliable point person who understood both sides of the process, developers got their permits processed more efficiently, and I got additional income plus the security of having my own business on the side. Everline knew about this arrangement. In fact, it was one of the reasons they'd hired me. What they'd failed to grasp, or perhaps simply forgotten in their rush to replace me with a younger model, was that my company wasn't just a pass-through entity. It had real authority in the permitting process. For the Riverside development, all the critical permits had been filed under my LLC's oversight, with my digital signature required for final approval. Without me, those permits were in limbo. I closed my laptop and sipped my tea, considering my options. I could sign off on the permits as a professional courtesy, allowing Everline to proceed without interruption. That would be the nice thing to do. Or I could remind them of exactly what they'd lost when they fired me. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Don't do anything rash, Mom. Talk to a lawyer first." I smiled. My daughter really did know me too well. The next morning, Saturday, I contacted my friend Victoria, who happened to be an employment attorney. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. "They can't just fire you because of your age," Victoria said after hearing my story. "But proving age discrimination can be tricky." "I'm not interested in a discrimination lawsuit right now," I replied. "I want to know about my obligations regarding the permits filed through my consulting company." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I see where this is going. Let me be clear. If those permits were filed through your LLC and your signature is required for finalization, you are under no obligation to provide that signature without proper compensation for your services. And if Everline assumed those services were covered under my employment with them, that would be their mistake, Victoria said with a small smile. Especially if your consulting work was established as a separate business entity. Do you have documentation of the arrangement? I nodded, thinking of the folder on my laptop. Perfect, Victoria said. Let me draft a letter outlining your position. As I drove home from our meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since hearing Trent's dismissive budget cuts granny, I felt in control again. Monday would be interesting. Monday morning arrived with a flurry of missed calls and increasingly frantic text messages from Everline. I ignored them all as I calmly went about my morning routine: breakfast, crossword puzzle, a bit of gardening in the early spring sunshine. It was the first Monday in years I hadn't spent in a fluorescent-lit office, and I was determined to enjoy it. At 10:15 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Trent or anyone else from Everline. It was Harold from the city planning office. I decided to answer. "Becky?" "Thank goodness," Harold said when I picked up. "We've got a situation with the Riverside permits. Everline submitted a request for final approval, but everything's filed under your LLC. I told them I can't proceed without your digital signature." "Yes, that's correct," I replied calmly. "My company is the official liaison for that project." "They're saying you're no longer involved with the project? Something about restructuring?" "My employment with Everline ended Friday," I explained. "But my consulting company's involvement with the permits is a separate matter entirely." Harold paused before speaking again. "I see. Well, this puts us in an awkward position. The city can't proceed without your sign-off, but Everline is insisting we bypass you." "That's not possible under our agreement with the city, is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No, it's not," Harold confirmed. "The expedited process we established requires your verification. Without it, they'd need to resubmit everything through the standard channels." "And how long would that take?" Harold laughed. "For a project of Riverside's size? Months at minimum. Plus they'd lose their place in line." After finishing with Harold, I checked my phone to find 3 more missed calls from Trent. The latest voicemail was notably different from his earlier messages. "Becky, look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we please discuss the Riverside permits? Call me back as soon as possible." I smiled. The panic in his voice was unmistakable. He'd finally realized what my firing actually meant for his precious project. At noon, I received an email from Victoria with the draft letter she'd prepared for Everline. It was perfect. Professional, firm, and crystal clear about my position. Smith Regulatory Consulting would be happy to complete the permit process for the Riverside development for a consulting fee of $75,000, approximately what I would have earned in salary over the next 9 months, plus formal credit as the regulatory compliance specialist on all project documentation. I approved the letter, and Victoria sent it immediately. Trent's response came within minutes, a hastily written email demanding that I call him for an urgent discussion. I ignored it. Instead, I drove to my favorite nursery and spent the afternoon selecting plants for my garden. I was examining tomato seedlings when my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Mrs. Smith, this is Jackson Warren." I nearly dropped my phone. Jackson Warren was the principal investor in the Riverside development, a prominent businessman with deep pockets and a reputation for not tolerating delays. "Yes, Mr. Warren. What can I do for you?" "I understand there's an issue with the permits for Riverside," he said, his tone direct but not unfriendly. "Trent Callahan seems to be having trouble explaining the situation clearly. I'd like to meet with you directly to understand what's happening." I agreed to meet him the following morning at his downtown office. When I returned home, I found an email from Jenna Blake in my inbox. The subject line read, "Please help." The message itself was both pleading and condescending. Becky, I know you must be upset about the restructuring, but holding up the Riverside project is only hurting your professional reputation. Please be reasonable and sign off on the permits. I'd be happy to include your name in the acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. After being fired and replaced, she thought I'd settle for a mention in the acknowledgements. I deleted the email without responding and went back to planning my garden. Tomorrow's meeting with Jackson Warren would be interesting indeed. Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Jackson Warren, choosing an elegant navy suit I'd rarely worn to the casual Everline office. I arrived at Warren Development's sleek downtown headquarters 15 minutes early and was immediately escorted to a spacious conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the very riverfront the Riverside project was meant to transform. Jackson Warren entered precisely on time, a tall man in his late 50s with silver hair and a reputation for blunt speaking. He shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Smith, thank you for coming. Coffee?" I accepted, and as his assistant served us, Warren got straight to the point. "I've invested $12 million in the Riverside development so far," he said. "Now I learn that the entire project is stalled because Everline fired the one person who could navigate the permit process. I'm not pleased. I understand your frustration, Mr. Warren." "Call me Jackson," he said, leaning forward. "I've been looking into this situation. It seems your firing wasn't just unexpected. It was exceptionally poorly timed and possibly illegal." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "Tell me about these permits," Jackson continued. "Trent claims it's a simple paperwork issue that you're dragging out because you're bitter about being let go." I opened my laptop and showed Jackson the digital trail of the Riverside permits. The initial applications, the preliminary approvals, the pending final clearances, all filed through Smith Regulatory Consulting. 3 years ago, the city of Omaha asked me to establish this arrangement to streamline the approval process for major developments, I explained. Everline knew this. It's why they hired me. But apparently they forgot that my consulting company is legally separate from my employment. Jackson studied the documents carefully. "And without your signature on these final approvals, the project can't move forward. Everline would need to resubmit everything through standard channels, which would take months at minimum." "I see." Jackson sat back, his expression thoughtful. "And you sent them terms for completing the process?" "My attorney did, yes. A consulting fee plus professional credit for my work. Reasonable terms. $75,000, about 9 months of the salary they were no longer willing to pay me, plus recognition as the regulatory compliance specialist on project documentation." Jackson nodded slowly. "And their response?" "Demands that I call Trent for an urgent discussion. Nothing addressing the actual terms." "Typical," Jackson muttered. He tapped his fingers on the table for a moment, then made a decision. "Mrs. Smith, Becky, I'd like to make you an offer that bypasses Everline entirely. This was unexpected." "I'm listening." "Warren Development would retain Smith Regulatory Consulting directly for the duration of the Riverside project. Same fee you proposed to Everline, plus a bonus structure tied to meeting key regulatory milestones. You'd work directly with my team, not through Everline." I tried to keep my expression neutral despite my surprise. "And Everline's role?" "That's between me and them," Jackson said with a cold smile. "But I'm reconsidering our entire relationship given how they've mismanaged this situation." I left the meeting with a handshake agreement and instructions to have Victoria review the formal contract that would arrive that afternoon. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Trent. "Emergency meeting about Riverside today at 3 p.m. Your presence requested. Will pay consultation fee." Too late, I thought. Much too late. When I arrived home, I found an elaborate flower arrangement on my porch with a card from Jenna. "So sorry about the misunderstanding. Please call Trent ASAP. We need you." I placed the flowers on my elderly neighbor's porch instead, knowing she would enjoy them more than I would. Then I called Victoria to brief her on the Warren Development offer. They're offering to match the fee we proposed to Everline, plus performance bonuses, I explained. And I'd be working directly with Warren's team, not through Everline. Cutting Everline out entirely, Victoria said with an appreciative whistle. That's quite a development. Did Warren indicate what this means for his relationship with Everline? He said he's reconsidering it. I got the impression that Trent has some explaining to do. I imagine he does, Victoria replied. Send me the contract when it arrives. In the meantime, I suggest you continue ignoring Everline's increasingly desperate attempts to contact you. I spent the afternoon in my garden, planting the seedlings I'd purchased the day before. It was therapeutic, digging in the soil, setting young plants into place, imagining the harvest to come. A perfect metaphor for this unexpected new chapter in my professional life, planting seeds for future growth after being uprooted. By Wednesday morning, news of my arrangement with Warren Development had spread through Omaha's tight-knit development community. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from former colleagues, other developers, and even journalists seeking comments. Trent's desperation reached new heights. First came an email offering an immediate consulting contract at twice the rate I'd requested. When I didn't respond, he followed up with a voicemail. Becky, please, we need to talk. Warren's threatening to pull Everline from the Riverside project entirely. This could ruin us. Whatever you want, name your price. You can have your old job back with a raise. Just call me. The panic in his voice was almost satisfying enough to make up for budget cuts, Granny. Almost, but not quite. At noon, Victoria called with an update. Warren's legal team sent over the contract. I've reviewed it. It's very favorable. Significantly better terms than anything Everline might offer you now. How so? I asked. For starters, it's not just for Riverside. Warren wants Smith Regulatory Consulting retained for all of his development projects in Omaha for the next 2 years, with an option to renew. The fee structure would give you a comfortable 6-figure income, plus those performance bonuses we discussed. And Everline's role? That's the interesting part, Victoria said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The contract includes a clause stating that Warren Development reserves the right to select or reject any architectural partners for their projects. There's no guarantee that Everline will remain involved with Riverside, let alone future developments. I signed the contract that afternoon, feeling a strange mix of vindication and melancholy. I hadn't set out to destroy Everline. I'd given 7 good years to that firm. But they had made their choice when they decided I was disposable. By Thursday, the situation had evolved dramatically. I received a call from Harold at the city planning office. Becky, you won't believe what's happening. Trent Callahan has been calling every hour, trying to find a way around the permit requirements. When I explained it wasn't possible, he actually suggested that the dinosaur procedures needed to be updated for the modern era. I laughed. I assume that went over well? About as well as you'd expect, Harold chuckled. The planning director reminded him that those dinosaur procedures ensure public safety and regulatory compliance. Then he asked if Everline was officially rejecting the expedited process we established with your consultancy. Trent backpedaled pretty quickly after that. Later that day, I met with Jackson Warren and his project team to begin the transition. As we sat in Warren Development's sleek conference room, Jackson made a surprising announcement. I've decided to terminate Everline's contract for the Riverside development, he stated matter-of-factly. Their mishandling of the permit process demonstrates a fundamental lack of professional judgment that I'm not willing to risk on a $35 million project. What about the architectural plans they've already completed? I asked, stunned by the decisiveness of his move. We've retained ownership of all plans and specifications per our contract, Jackson explained. I've already reached out to Hartman and Associates to take over. They've agreed to honor the existing designs with some minor modifications. Hartman and Associates was Everline's biggest competitor in Omaha. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now, Jackson continued, turning to me with a smile, let's discuss how we get this project back on track. With your expertise leading our regulatory compliance efforts, I'm confident we can make up for lost time. As the meeting progressed, I found myself energized by the challenge ahead. At 61, I had been dismissed as irrelevant, a granny whose experience no longer had value. Now, I was a key consultant on the biggest development project in Omaha, working directly with one of the city's most influential investors. Sometimes being fired is the best thing that can happen to you, especially when they have no idea what they're losing. The headline in Monday's Omaha World-Herald business section said it all. Warren Development drops Everline from Riverside project, cites permit mismanagement. The article detailed how the $35 million project would now proceed under new architectural leadership, with Smith Regulatory Consulting handling all regulatory compliance. There was even a quote from Jackson Warren. "In development, experience and relationships matter. We've brought in the best regulatory compliance specialist in Omaha to ensure this project proceeds smoothly for the benefit of the community." The best part? A small photo of me standing with the Warren development team at the permit office, my digital signature finalizing the very approvals that had been in limbo the week before. I saved a copy of the newspaper alongside the termination notice Trent had handed me just 10 days earlier. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, from fired with a paltry 2-week severance to featured in the business section as a key consultant on Omaha's most significant development project. Catherine called shortly after the article was published. "Mom, you're famous," she exclaimed, "and I just heard through the grapevine that Everline is in complete disarray." "Oh?" I tried to sound merely curious rather than satisfied. "Apparently, they've lost 2 other clients who are concerned about their ability to navigate the permit process without you. And Jenna? She's been reassigned to social media strategy after she couldn't figure out how to submit a basic variance application." I couldn't help but smile at that. Social media strategy. Exactly what Jenna was qualified for, not the complex regulatory work Trent had tried to foist upon her after firing me. "It's not just Riverside they've lost," Catherine continued. "Jackson Warren has 5 other projects in development across the city, and word is he's taken all of them away from Everline. That's millions in contracts." "That's business," I replied simply. "No, Mom," Catherine laughed. "That's karma." "It's not karma," I corrected her gently. "It's just the natural consequence of undervaluing expertise." 3 months later, I stood at the Riverside groundbreaking ceremony, watching as Jackson Warren and city officials ceremonially turned the first shovels of dirt on the project. My role had expanded beyond regulatory compliance. I was now effectively Warren Development's liaison with the city for all their projects, a position created specifically for my unique combination of expertise and relationships. As photographers captured the moment for local news outlets, I spotted a familiar face on the periphery of the crowd. Trent Callahan, looking decidedly less confident than when he'd fired me with a dismissive, "Budget cuts, Granny." Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, his discomfort evident. After the ceremony, a reporter from the Omaha World-Herald approached me for an interview. The resulting article, "The Permit Whisperer: How Becky Smith Became Omaha's Most Sought-After Development Consultant," ran on the front page of the business section. It detailed my decades of experience, the respect I commanded from city officials, and the critical role regulatory compliance played in successful urban development. There was even a quote from Harold at the city planning office. "Becky knows more about Omaha's zoning and permit requirements than anyone else in the industry. Developers who work with her get their projects approved in half the time." My consulting business expanded rapidly after that. I hired 2 assistants, experienced women in their 50s who'd been similarly pushed aside at other firms, and established an internship program specifically for people changing careers midlife. I never actively sought to damage Everline, but I watched with detached interest as their fortunes declined. Without access to my expedited permit channel, their projects faced delays. Several clients followed Warren Development's lead and took their business elsewhere. Trent's youthful approach wasn't delivering the results he'd promised. Jenna lasted 6 more months before leaving for a marketing position at another firm. I wished her well when I heard the news. She was young, She had time to learn that flash without substance rarely succeeds in the long run. As for me, at 61, I had embarked on the most rewarding phase of my career. Not as someone's employee, but as the architect of my own success, building a business that valued experience, embraced wisdom, and never ever dismissed someone as just a granny.